I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy podcast is brought to you in part by Squatty Potty, the original toilet step stool that creates healthy toilet posture. Learn how squatting relaxes the colon and allows for easy, healthy elimination at squattypotty.com.
And by Comfy Comfy, makers of all-natural buckwheat hull pillows. Comfy pillows provide superior support by conforming to your head and neck for healthy, restful sleep. On the web at comfycomfy.com. For 10% off your first order, enter the code PEOPLES at checkout. Have you ever tried to lose weight by dieting only to end up back where you started? Could the best diet be the one you don't know you're on? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
We make a surprising number of food decisions every day. Eggs or cereal for breakfast, sandwich or salad for lunch, yummy dessert or apple slices at dinner. How does the table setting, the lighting, and our mood affect what we put in our mouth?
Dr. Brian Wansink is the Sherlock Holmes of food. He's been studying eating behavior for years and has some simple tricks to help us overcome mindless eating.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, find out why we eat more than we think and what to do about it.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy Health headlines, the price of prescription creams, gels, and ointments has been soaring. A study published in JAMA Dermatology looked at the retail costs of dermatologic drugs in 2009, 2011, 2014, and 2015. By the end of the investigation, the researchers had checked prices on 120 different brand name or generic medications. They honed in on 19 brand name medicines that are frequently prescribed. The prices of these important drugs went up over 400% during the survey period. Skin cancer medications went up 1,240%. These were also the most expensive drugs. Corticosteroids, which are mainstays of dermatological prescribing, went up nearly 300%. The authors conclude that the increase in prices of the surveyed medications far outpaced the National Consumer Price Index inflation rate of 11% between 2009 and 2015. They also pointed out that prescription drug prices in general are rising way faster than inflation, gross domestic product, or other healthcare expenditures.
The American College of Physicians also has its eye on the rising cost of prescription drugs. The organization points out that we are now spending $324 billion each year on such medicines. It urges its members to prescribe generic substitutes whenever possible. The president of this organization states that clinicians often prescribe more expensive brand-name drugs when equally effective, well-proven, and less expensive generic versions are available. The group commissioned a study to see how often generic and brand-name drugs are prescribed. The patient population in the study had diabetes and was on Medicare. Between 23 and 45% of the prescriptions were written for brand-name medicines, even though generic versions were available. The doctor group suggests that writing prescriptions for generic drugs could help patients afford their medicines and keep taking them better.
Analysis of more than 40 studies with 1.2 million participants has shown that a high resting heart rate could be a marker for poor cardiovascular health. The Chinese epidemiologists found that a pulse that is increased by about 10 beats per minute boosts the risk of premature death by around 9%. People with a resting heart rate of 80 beats per minute or more have a 45% higher risk of dying early compared to those with a heart rate of 60 or below. The investigators recommend that those with high heart rates adopt regular exercise routines to lower their resting heart rate.
A 10-year study of older Americans shows that those who are physically active have a lower risk of heart attacks and strokes. The study included more than 4,000 men and women whose average age at the beginning of the study was 73 years old. Those who walked faster than 3 miles an hour were only half as likely to develop heart disease or a stroke as those who ambled slower than 2 miles an hour. The researchers found that those walking 7 blocks a day or so cut their risk of stroke or cardiovascular disease by around 50%, compared to people who walked 5 blocks or fewer a week. Active leisure activities such as yard work, swimming, biking, or hiking were also protective. The lead author noted, "Our study of older Americans shows that even late in life, moderate physical activity such as walking is linked to lower incidence of cardiovascular disease."
Inadequate levels of vitamin D have been linked to lower immunity and an increased risk of upper respiratory infections. But a new study shows that vitamin D supplements did not reduce the number of colds that people with asthma catch, nor did they lower the severity of these colds. The study included 400 adults with mild to moderate asthma. They were randomized to receive placebo pills or a loading dose of 100,000 international units of vitamin D, followed by 4,000 IUs daily. The double-blind trial lasted 7 months. Even though the majority of those taking vitamin D had adequate blood levels of 25-hydroxyvitamin D after 3 months, it made no difference in the number of colds they caught. The scientists were interested in reducing the number of colds because such infections can worsen asthma symptoms. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. How do you choose what you're going to eat for breakfast, lunch, dinner, or snacks? They seem like such simple decisions, but they're trickier than you might imagine, and they're easily influenced by some subtle and some not-so-subtle forces that are often beyond our control.
To learn more about why we eat more than we think, we turn to the Sherlock Holmes of food. Dr. Brian Wansink is the John S. Dyson Professor of Applied Economics at Cornell University and director of the renowned Cornell Food and Brand Lab, and author of Mindless Eating and also the upcoming book Slim by Design, Mindless Eating Solutions for Everyday Life.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Wansink.
Well, it's great to be with you again.
Thank you so much for joining us. You know, I think there's one issue that you have dealt with that you own more than almost anybody else, and that is this idea that, you know, hunger is not necessarily what drives us to eat and how much we eat. And, you know, a lot of people think that's what it is. You know, oh, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. But in point of fact, you think it's our brain.
It's crazy. Actually, what's interesting is that if you end up asking 1,000 people to think of the last time they overate, okay, what we find is about 12% will say the last time they overate was because of mood. You know, they're either happy or they're sad or they're celebrating and they're bored. About 49% will say, well, it's just must have been because I was really, really hungry. And then about 38% say it's because of the food. The food was great. But, you know, we set up these amazing experiments where we give people who aren't hungry, who just finished dinner, nasty, stale food like popcorn and things like this. And it doesn't even taste good. And once we rule out them not being hungry and once we rule out them not tasting good, we still find things as silly as what the person's doing next to them or the size of the plate we give them cause them to overeat by about 44%.
That's amazing, especially, you know, I don't find the popcorns all that appealing after I've just finished a meal. So I can't imagine that stale popcorn would be even more appealing.
You know, but it's not even just popcorn. We give people ice cream with fish sauce in it.
No way.
Oh, it's terrible. We'll make our own ice cream and we won't put hardly any sugar in. It's just like, oh, this is terrible. And people are still eating it up.
Why? I mean, what is it that is driving people to eat when they're not really hungry?
Well, a lot of these end up being the cues that are around us. Like I mentioned just in the last example, we end up about 44% of how much we serve and eat is determined by what the person did just before us. If he or she took a lot, man, we are doomed. If he or she is on a diet, we're going to do a little bit better. But we even find simply giving somebody a large bowl, for instance, a large ice cream bowl or cereal bowl, that on average people will pour somewhere between 22 and 32% more into a larger bowl. And what we find is that, regardless of what we think, we are all pretty much, as adults, members of the Clean Plate Club. In fact, we find in meal studies that each one of us, you two and me and everybody I know, eats about 92% of anything they put on their plate or in their own bowl. So if something tricks us into putting a little bit more, whether it be the size of a plate or the person next to us, it's going down.
We have an acquaintance, used to be our radio engineer, who said on more than one occasion that he was on the seafood diet. He saw food and he ate it. and basically that sounds like a lot of us. If it's there, we're going to eat it, especially if it's, one of those buffets, all you can eat.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Yeah, one of the things that we've done, well, we went into a bunch of Chinese buffets around the country, and one of the things we were trying to figure out is, what is it that skinny people do at buffets that heavy people don't? Because if you go to any buffet, a third of the people there are skinny. And one of the things we find, and this is relevant to your seafood diet comment, is one of the things that skinny people do, as there's many things they do, but one of them they do is about 73% of them scout out the buffet. They look at everything on the buffet before they pick up their plate. In contrast to that, about the same percentage, about 77% of all heavy people do just the opposite. First thing they do is they pick up that plate, they stare at the item right next to it and kind of go to themselves, do we want it or don't I? They go to the second item, do we want it or don't I? And so there you have two groups of people. The first group has already checked out the buffet. They know what they want, and they sort of, swoop down with their eagle eye and pick out the stir fry they want. The other group is just basically looking at everything and saying, could I possibly eat it? And as a result, it's one of the habits that heavy diners have picked up that just continue to make them heavy.
Well, it sounds as though one of the things we might want to do is hang out with friends who eat sensibly. If, in fact, what the other person we're eating with has an impact on what we take.
That's very true. You like to hang around people who don't make you feel guilty or bad. Mm-hmm. You tend to hang around people who are kind of similar to you, and if you don't, at some point you find sort of there's this migration so that you are pretty similar. It's kind of neat. I know that you guys are food lovers, and there might be some foodies and some closet chefs out in the audience. And one of the things that we found over the years, too, is that it's crazy, but people who are really good cooks and who enjoy entertaining, all of a sudden they've got an entire group of friends who, too, enjoy cooking and enjoy entertaining. And you find this like attracts like all over in the food and eating behavior world.
Are there ways we can use that to our advantage?
Well, one thing that can be done is that when you're eating dinner at a restaurant, if you are eating with one other person, you're likely 30% more than if you eat by yourself. If you're with 7 other people, you're likely to eat about 90% more, almost twice as much if you're with 7 other people. Because what happens is nobody tends to eat meals with people they hate. Okay, you tend to eat with people you like, whether they be the coworkers you like the most, or whether they be family that you like or friends you like. And the danger of doing that, though, is you drag out a meal. Your 20-minute meal now becomes a 40-minute meal, or the hour dinner becomes a 2-hour dinner, and that's just more time for you to pick up another piece of bread and order another glass of wine or get an appetizer or whatever. And one way to prevent this is, of course, just to eat alone under the staircase, like Harry Potter.
Not very appetizing, so to speak.
But the second way might be to say, okay, what can I do to have the stuff I want most without feeling put out? And what we've done in our lab at the Cornell Food and Brand Lab is we've done a bunch of studies, and one solution we've had that works for a ton of people is what we call the restaurant rule of 2. You're going out with your best friends who are big eaters, they're big partiers, they are big lovers of life. You don't have to eat 90% more just because they will. What you can do is say, look, I'm going to use the restaurant rule of two. I'm going to order any entree, any reasonable entree, that I want. I'm not going to order the salad with dressing on the side if I don't want it. I'm going to order any one reasonable entree. And then in addition to that, I'm going to let myself have any two items I want most, but only two. So if I want an appetizer and a breadstick, great. If I want a breadstick and a glass of wine, great. If I want a glass of wine and dessert, great. I just can't have an appetizer, two breadsticks, a glass of wine, and a dessert. I have to pick the two I want the most. And what we find is that people end up reporting back that on average, instead of eating 90% more, what they end up doing is they end up eating about 40% less. I mean, they still eat more, but they don't eat that much more.
One of the problems that I have when I'm eating with a group of friends or even with business acquaintances, I'm not paying attention to the food. I'm paying attention to the conversation. And that turns into mindless eating. And that also happens at cocktail parties where there are, all those tasty treats. And I'm talking to people and I'm eating, but I'm not even tasting what I'm eating. How can we change that?
Well, the easy way to do is to set up – you don't want to tell yourself no, because then all of a sudden that just backfires. It blows up later on. But you want to set up easy barriers that make it just a little bit difficult to overeat. Like, so for instance, let's take the cocktail party. One of the things, you can say, well, I just won't eat X, Y, and Z. It's like, yeah, well, you're not going to enjoy yourself that much. What we tell people to do, and this is something that we've tested in all sorts of holiday parties, is we have something called just the rule of two. And what we tell people, look, you can put anything on your little cocktail reception plate that you want to. You can put the wings, you can put the cheese cubes, you can put fudge, you can put divinity. You put whatever you want to on it. But you can only put two different items on your plate at a time. So if you say, well, I like fudge and chicken wings most, well, great. Put fudge and chicken wings on your plate. And after you're finished with that, you can go back for two additional items, any other two items. You just can't have 5 or 6 different things at once. And what we find is again, people report consuming a lot less than they typically would, because you'll take the first two things you like the most and put them on your plate, and you'll eat them. And then you'll say, well, do I want to go back for seconds? And you might go back for seconds. But after that point, you've had your 4 favorite things, and we find people are a lot less likely to go back again and again. And it enables them to pay attention to these friends and some of the maybe workers that they don't talk to a lot, while at the same time not turning into Jabba the Hutt.
You're listening to Dr. Brian Wansink, the John S. Dyson Professor of Applied Economics at Cornell University. He's director of the Cornell Food and Brand Lab. His book is Mindless Eating: Why We Eat More Than We Think.
I love the strategy of planning the buffet table ahead of time.
Yeah, scouting. It's a good idea.
It is a good idea. We need to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to learn more about mood and food.
How do food rituals, such as saying grace before a meal, affect food intake?
Dr. Wansink has a trick for you to help keep you from overindulging. It involves warm beer. Yes, warm beer. And we'll find out what his M&M study revealed. How much of a sinful treat do you really need to feel satisfied?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like the information you hear when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, you may also enjoy our book published by National Geographic. It's The People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies, available online at peoplespharmacy.com or at your favorite bookstore.
Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Redx Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number is 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
And by Squatty Potty Toilet Stools, creating healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. More information about how toilet posture affects your health at squattypotty.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 951. That phone number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're talking about how to move from mindless overeating to sensible consumption. Why is the best diet the one you don't know you're on?
We're talking with Dr. Brian Wansink. He's the John S. Dyson Professor of Applied Economics at Cornell University and Director of the Cornell Food and Brand Lab. He's author of Mindless Eating, Why We Eat More Than We Think.
Dr. Wansink, we've been talking about parties and eating out at restaurants and how we can kind of keep the lid on just a little bit without feeling deprived. But, sometimes we're in a different mood, in a different situation. How does our mood affect what we're eating?
It can have a tremendous impact in two different ways. What we find is any extreme mood causes people to eat a little bit more, okay? You're in a bad mood, you tend to eat a little bit more because what you're trying to do is you're trying to regain this positive mood. If you're in a happy mood, you tend to eat a little bit more, but it's healthier stuff because what you're trying to do is maintain your mood. And we just published a really cool paper, and actually this just came out, and what we did is we brought people in all these different circumstances where we'd alter their moods in different sort of ways. We'd make them either happy or sad, and we'd see what they would order off of restaurant menus. And if you're sad, even just not even sad, but even just a little bummed out, even almost just neutral. Okay, what you'll tend to do is you'll order a little bit worse, and you'll order a little bit more than you typically would if you're happy. And what we also find, though, is if people just put huge amounts of food in front of you, you don't have any control over what it is, again, you'll tend to pick at the less healthy foods, and you'll eat more of them. But my favorite study is the one that is the last one, in that we show that you can turn this all around. You can so easily change things by doing one simple thing before you sit down to eat at home or before you order at a restaurant. All you have to do is, you can say this to yourself, or you can say it to your spouse or your significant other or whatever. All you have to do is say to yourself or somebody else, one thing that happened that day that you are grateful for. Doing that one thing shifts your mood enough so that I don't know if you think twice about what you eat, but you think about the future. You say something great happened today. All of a sudden you're thinking about the cool things in the future, not just how miserable and wretched your life was that day. And we find that it changes both how many calories people eat, but it also changes the mix of healthy to less healthy foods.
Dr. Wansink, I know a lot of our listeners who are scientists are going to say, okay, how much does it make a difference? In other words, say you've had a really bad day. The boss just tore into you. You're not living up to expectations. Maybe the dog bit you on the way out the door. The kids are talking back to you. You had a flat tire. I mean, just everything that could go wrong goes wrong. And so now, it's the end of the day and you're sitting down to have dinner, and let's start with a beer or two, and then
that was before dinner.
Right. Bring it on. I'm eating everything, and what you're suggesting is, now if I just say, let's see, what am I grateful for today? How much difference is that actually going to make?
Yeah. Well, so it can make a lot of difference. Now, we just had people we said we want to say to yourself, we had people write down one thing they're grateful for. But another experiment, we had people say, a word of thanks, whether that you call it a grace or a prayer, or just an affirmation. And one of the things we found is that the number of fewer calories wasn't like massively less. I think there's only like maybe 8 or 9% fewer calories. Still statistically significant, okay? Instead of a 800 calorie dinner, all of a sudden it's maybe a 720 calorie dinner. Small amount of calories, but what it did is it shifted the ratio of we gave people either very, very healthy stuff or very, very unhealthy stuff. I mean, I think it was like fries and fried chicken and then salad and a fruit salad. And we found it shifted the ratio of healthy to unhealthy by about 26 or 28%. So it didn't shift calories as much, but it definitely shifted people more toward healthier stuff.
Well, as you've just mentioned, it sounds a lot like this practice is a sort of grace, which a lot of religious people do anyway. But it sounds like even if you're not religious, you could practice gratitude before the meal and maybe have an impact on your diet.
No, that's exactly right. In fact, we do this kind of cool thing in our family. I mean, we say grace before meals, but we go around and I've got 3 little girls under the age of 8. And I have everybody at the table has to say one thing they're grateful for that day, one thing that happened that wasn't that great that day, a person who they're very grateful for that day, and what their plans are for the future. Everybody has to talk about those 4 things, and it really puts people in a much better mood, and actually it also gives you something to talk about.
Now, do you do that before you start eating? Because at our house, we have some wordy people. It might be half an hour before we can start to eat. In our home, we say grace before the meal, and then once that's over, we say, who wants to go first? And they go first. And basically, it does take half the meal, but people are already thinking about the positive thing that happened to them that day and who they appreciate most, and I think even before they say it, it kind of puts them in that right frame. You know, I mentioned a little while ago the idea of having a couple of beers before dinner, especially when you've had a tough day. My suspicion is that a lot of the calories that people consume are in the form of alcoholic beverages, in large measure because they think they deserve something to, help ease the pain that they went through over the course of the day. And I'm wondering, how do you begin to change that habit?
It's interesting to say that because one of the things that we do is we make sure that there's never more than 1 cold beer in the refrigerator at the time. There could be, 5 of them sitting right next to the refrigerator, right behind the refrigerator, but there's never more than 1 in there at a time. If I have that one, then I'm like, well, really, how bad do I want this that I'll drink a warm one?
Uh-huh.
And oftentimes I kind of go, man, really not very bad. And so it ends up being sort of building governor because I say, well, geez, am I that desperate tonight? Or, nah. Well, I think there's easy governors to put in place for something like that.
Well, that does bring up the whole issue of what you have on hand. And, there are people, I won't mention any names, but there is a relative that's near and dear to us. And she has a lot of chocolate in the refrigerator. I'm not talking just like 1 or 2 bars. But holy cow, when we went to visit recently, I was like, whoa. Like she's saving up for Noah's Ark. and so how much does having that stuff sitting around influence your eating behavior?
Well, of course it can if you let it and if you put it in a really obvious spot where it's the first thing she sees. And we find, for instance, that when a person opens a refrigerator or cupboard, this is a really cool set of studies we did. We found that the very first thing you see when you open a cupboard or refrigerator, you're 3 times more likely to take than the 5th thing you see. So if that chocolate is front and center, every time she opens the door, the first question in her mind is, do I want the chocolate? Okay. Only then does she go to the second item or the third item she sees or 4th. If she puts it way out of sight lines, that really decreases the likelihood that she's going to take it. I'm not necessarily a very big believer in restricting yourself and getting rid of anything that might be a vice or whatever. But I'm a huge believer in making it unbelievably inconvenient to eat. Because then you say, because then if you don't, if you don't have it, you kind of go, well, it's not that I'm, putting myself out. It's because I must not want it bad enough. I don't want a warm beer bad enough. It's not that I can't have one. I just don't want it bad enough. And in her case, whether it be wrapping it up in tinfoil and putting it in the back of the vegetable bin, wrapping it up and double wrapping it in a bag and putting it somewhere, whether it be putting it in the cupboard, that's the thing that I would encourage her to do, so that there's a cost, there's a time and convenience cost for her to have that piece of chocolate.
That would make a lot of sense, especially since, if Joe noticed it, it's pretty noticeable. He wasn't spending a lot of time rummaging in the refrigerator.
And so that's the idea about this idea of being slim by design. It's about redesigning your immediate environments so that it helps you do the right thing without you having to use willpower. Slim by willpower doesn't work for most of us.
I don't know if this was your study or who did this study, but there was some research a few years ago about the jar of M&Ms or whatever the candy was that was sitting there on the desk at work in a prominent place, and just calling out. And I happen to like M&Ms, so yes, M&Ms do call to me. And then
what did they say, Joe? Eat me?
Eat me right now. I'm so tasty. You're going to love me. But then I think you or your colleagues moved the M&Ms so that you had to actually make an effort to reach out to them rather than have them reach out to you. And it really had an impact on the eating behavior at work.
What's interesting was it doubled how much people ate if it was on their desk. And actually, we did the original the famous study that was published in with Hershey Kisses. I think it was recreated for TV by we used M&Ms because it's more colorful. But one thing we found is that simply moving these Hershey bowls of 30 Hershey Kisses 6 feet away from somebody's desk led them to eat, instead of 9 of them, which is about 225 calories every day, eating about 100 calories every day, about 125 calories less, which, over the course of a year is going to be about an 8-pound difference. But what's interesting about that, when we after the end of this month, when we kind of say, geez, you eat about half as many when it's 6 feet away. Is it because it's so much work to get up? People didn't say it was a lot of work. What they said was, no, it's just that 6 feet gives me pause to ask myself, am I really that hungry? And half the time they'd say no.
Mm-hmm. Or how much do I really want this? Because let's face it, most of the time when we eat candy, at least for me, it's not because I'm hungry. It's because it tastes good. I mean,
Yes,
I don't eat candy when I'm hungry. If I'm hungry, I want something more substantial.
Yeah, and that's one thing we find with comfort foods is that, people kind of say, well, oh my gosh, what do I do to kind of rage against comfort foods? And it's just like, over 40% of all people's favorite comfort foods in the world, if you were to take 1,000 North Americans, over 40% of all comfort foods are actually healthy foods. They're meal-related foods. They're hamburgers or pasta or soup or even salad, but they're meal-related foods. About 55% of them are the ones we tend to think of stereotypically, the gooey lava cake. And so in that case, it is such, in almost all of our minds, it's a much finer line than we think between an indulgent comfort food and a really healthy comfort food. And it's a great switch to make. You say, I really want some ice cream. It's like, what would I feel like instead if I warmed up blah, blah, blah? And 15 minutes later, we find people are just as happy.
Now, I suspect that a lot of people, engage in this mindless eating, especially sweet treats, when they're feeling, down in the dumps. I mean, forget the bad boss for a minute. Just, I'm feeling kind of low today. How can we change our mood? And it's not that easy, so that it might change the way we relate to those sweet treats.
Well, I think there's a couple ways. There's actually more than a couple ways to do this. And again, there's lots of tips at the website, mindlesseating.org, mindlesseating.org. There's a bunch of tips there, too. But a couple things, let me refer back to the study I did a while back about happy moods and gratitude. We found that simply having somebody write down on a piece of paper something that they're grateful for that day, or an event that happened in their life that made them feel really empowered. We just gave them 4x6 cards. That altered what they chose for snacks. Later that afternoon, it altered what they chose for snacks immediately, but it also altered what they had for snacks about 45 minutes when we said, okay, you can leave the room, and we gave them the choice of a treat bag to go. So that's one thing that I don't want to underestimate this mood thing. But another thing, and this is a cool study we just published just last year with a colleague from the Netherlands. We wanted to look at, okay, say you're in an irky mood and you're feeling sorry for yourself and whatever. How much of a snack, really, how much of a snack would you need to feel significantly better? Is it, the full 8 little sections of the Hershey bar? Is it, how much is it? Is it the full bag of M&Ms, or what is it? And one of the things we did is we gave people differing amounts. We asked them what they typically like to eat for a snack, the quantity. And then what we did is we gave them differing amounts of it on different days. And one of the things we found, which I just think is really, really cool, is that if we gave people just 25% of the amount that they believe they needed to feel better, so let's say instead of 8 little Hershey bar squares, we gave them 2, or instead of just giving them 23 Pringles potato chips, we gave them 5 or something. What we found is that 15 minutes later, almost to a person, people rated themselves as equally satisfied as somebody who ate the whole thing, but they also rated themselves as less guilty and more happy. Okay, but the secret was you can't just put a big candy bar in front of somebody and say you can only eat a quarter of it and they'll sit there. No, what you have to do is, as soon as you eat that, you've got to distract yourself. So we had people either return a phone call or to run a fake letter down and drop it off at an office in the next building and come back, or straighten up. Anything you do after you have just a little bit of a bite makes it so that 15 minutes later, you're saying, I had those potato chips. I can still even kind of taste them. Yeah. Your stomach doesn't say, yeah, but you only had 5. Because really, you weren't eating because you're hungry to begin with. And this is an incredibly cool trick that we can use. Just have a quarter of what you typically would, but then distract yourself. And 15 minutes later, I guarantee you're going to feel just as good, but happier and less guilty.
You're listening to Dr. Brian Wansink, the John S. Dyson Professor of Applied Economics at Cornell University. He's director of the Cornell Food and Brand Lab.
We need to take a short break. Coming up, how kids react to the design on cereal boxes.
What's the lure of a low-fat label?
How do you know when you're done with dinner? Dr. Wansink will give us some tricks to help us stop eating when we want to.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Squatty Potty Toilet Stools, creating healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. More information about how toilet posture affects your health at squattypotty.com.
And by Redux Industries, makers of utterly smooth foot cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-0710. 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 951. That number again, 800-732-2334. Or you can find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today our topic is mindless eating and what we can do to overcome it.
Our guest is Dr. Brian Wansink. He's the John S. Dyson Professor of Applied Economics at Cornell University and Director of the Cornell Food and Brand Lab. He's author of Mindless Eating, Why We Eat More Than We Think.
Dr. Wansink, you've just done a fascinating study about cereal boxes and their design and where they're put on the shelf. Would you tell us what you discovered?
Yeah, let me give you just a little bit of background about this. One of the things we've been looking at is how can companies take healthy products, whether it be the granola stuff or healthy snacks, how can they market healthy snacks as effectively as they market less healthy snacks? Because they do them in different ways, and it's just not that successful. And so one thing we ended up looking at initially was branding. And there's a lot of people say there shouldn't be branding in schools. It's, it's marketing or whatever. But we found who benefits most with branding? Well, it's not cookies, because people already want cookies, and putting an Elmo character on a cookie is not going to do any good. People are still going to want it. Who benefits most from branding in schools ends up being the healthy products. You put Elmo in a bag of carrots, and whoa, the percentage of kids who take it triple. Well, we looked at the same thing in grocery stores. It's like, wait, there's a lot of healthy cereals in grocery stores. There's a lot of healthy snacks. But I never buy them for my kids. My kids never ask for them either. So what is it that companies, well-meaning companies, can do to market those healthy things, as well as the foods that the kids really do want? And we found a couple things that are interesting. We found that, on average, if you look at kids' cereals versus adult cereals, the typical kids' cereal is about 23 inches off the ground. The typical adult cereal is about 48 inches off the ground. Theirs is knee-high to us. It's eye-high to them. Ours is eye-high to us. But what we also found is that the characters that end up being in these boxes have very different eye gazes. That adults' cereals, their eye gaze is just level with ours. In fact, it's like a 0.4 degree actually increase in the sight line.
If there even are characters on adult cereal boxes.
Right. And there aren't that many, yeah. They're kind of tough to find. You find them in Wheaties and you find them in some other things, but they're not often there. But with children's cereals, what we find is that the average eye gaze is about 10 degrees pointed down. I think 9.6 degrees pointed down. In fact, about 51 out of the 57 cereals we looked at across 10 stores had characters that looked down. Now, most of the time, it appears that they're just looking at the cereal. Why not? I love kids' cereals. So they're looking at the cereal. But the incidental issue is that gaze often also meets, the little gooblets as we take them through the aisle. And in a second study we did, which is really cool, we adjusted the eyes on a Trix box and gave them to college kids, for goodness sake. We either had the rabbit looking way down, or we had it looking right directly at the college kids. And we found that if there's this direct eye contact, at least with college kids, what it did, it increased their feelings of connection to the brand, but it also increased the percentage of them who chose Trix over Fruity Pebbles when given the option. And I think that there's some really, really great news you can use here for companies who are trying to market healthier products. Put Scooby-Doo on the Kashi Go Lean cereal and make that a lot more attractive.
Dr. Wansink, can you tell us a little bit about labels and how they trick us, especially this lure of low fat? I go past the yogurt section these days, and man, there is a lot of low-fat stuff. And we've just been told, after 30 to 40 years, that saturated fat is the ultimate enemy, that when you look at the research, probably not that big a deal. And so maybe this entire deprivation thing, let's get the low-fat milk, let's get the low-fat yogurt, let's get the low-fat, no-fat everything. Well, tell us about this trick.
Well, it's not a trick that companies are doing. It's a trick that we do on ourselves, okay? And that one of the things we find, if you take most foods, let's take snack foods, for instance, because that's where there's the highest percentage of low-fat stuff, or there's a high percentage of low-fat stuff. If you say to people, well, here's two kinds of cookies, low-fat and regular, how many less calories do you think the low-fat has? The typical person believes it has about half as many calories, okay, about 44% as many calories. In reality, it has 11% fewer calories. Because, they take the fat out, but, they got to put something in it so it doesn't taste like cardboard, so they put sugar in. So you're still getting a lot of calories, you're just getting a lot less fat. So here's what happens when you buy something that's low fat. Is first of all, you think it has fewer calories, and it does. But second of all, you believe that since you're being so doggone virtuous, that you can afford to reward yourself. So what we often find is that people end up eating, it ranges, but it's about 20% more calories than they typically otherwise would if it's regular food. Because what they're doing is they're eating about 35% more volume of food. Now, the easy thing to do, I guess we buy skim milk, but that's about it. But the easy thing to do is first of all, if you're buying something low fat, the best thing you can do is to take your best guess at how many calories are in those low-fat potato chips or low-fat candy bar, whatever, and double your best estimate of the calories that are in that, because you are going to be more accurate than if you take your best guess. So if you say, "Oh, these cookies are low-fat," I say low-fat Oreos, I bet it has 20 calories. Well, your best bet would be to double that to 40, and you're going to be a whole lot closer than you otherwise would.
Now, of course, you could actually do the experiment, look at the label and see what the serving size is and measure it out, and that would give you some idea of exactly how
Sure.
much food has how many calories. It's just that's going to take a lot of time.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that is a solution for about 5% of the people out there. It's just that for the other 95% of us, we go nuts before we do that.
Yeah.
The better solution for us is simply to say, look, I'm going to order whatever I want. I'm going to order the stuff that I think is going to taste good, but I'm just going to eat half as much. And what our research shows that with snack food, even if it's just a quarter as much, you're going to be just as happy 15 minutes later.
Well, you've pointed out that we're a country of low-fat foods and high-fat people, so it didn't work.
That's right. That's right. I had a French colleague. Send me something yesterday, and some French newspaper used that quote from me yesterday. And I think probably with great delight, given that it was French.
Oh, of course. The French love to feel a little bit superior to us. And, of course, when it comes to food, they frequently have the chance to feel superior to us.
They do. Yes, that's true. We actually did a really neat study a while back. We wanted to look at how do people know when they've had enough to eat at dinner time.
How do we know?
Well, it was interesting. I asked 150 French people, how they knew they were through eating dinner the night before. And the number one answer was they knew they were through eating dinner when they were no longer hungry. The second was they knew they were through eating dinner when the food no longer tasted good to them. Okay, internal cues to stop eating. About 6 months later, I moved back to the U.S. and asked the same question of 150 Chicagoans. At the time, I was a professor in Illinois. And the number one answer in Chicago is, I know I'm through eating dinner when my plate is empty. The second was, I know I'm through eating dinner when the TV show I'm watching is over.
Uh-huh. Oh, I'll bet that doesn't happen nearly as much in France. I think that would be seen as a violation of social norms. Or am I wrong?
Or a violation of citizenship or something. Yeah. They deport you to the U.S.
Where we think is perfectly normal.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, oftentimes we go out to eat and, we order the pizza, right? And so you get the whole thing. Now, you may feel completely satisfied after 2 slices, but there are 4 left. You're not going to leave them, and you're probably not going to want to have them wrapped to take home. So, what the heck? I'll just go ahead and finish. It's really good, and it will never taste as good as it does right now. So how do we trick our brains into stopping?
Well, it depends. Now, if my memory's right, are you guys down in the North Carolina area?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's usually not a problem for us that aren't in New York City or Philadelphia or Chicago or L.A. because a lot of us don't have that aversion to taking leftovers home, and I think that's the single best thing that most of us could do at restaurants to say, this is a massive portion. I have 2 meals here. I have my lunch here for tomorrow or breakfast tomorrow, and I have dinner tonight. And a lot of the people that we work with, a lot of people in my lab are very, very prone to taking food back and actually taking enough back so that it ends up being part of another meal. And I think trying to get over what sort of reservation some people have to not do that, I think it's a good exercise to have because I have incredible breakfasts because those breakfasts are usually part of what was left over from Lebec Fen the night before.
That sounds great.
Actually, I made that up about Lebec Fen. Well, Taco Bell, okay?
One thing that Joe and I have done for years that really helps us when we're eating out is we just order one entree and ask them to split it. And usually that's plenty of food.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, if I'm at a really high-end restaurant, and oftentimes when I travel, you have requests of where you want to go. What I'll do is I like sampling a lot of things. So what I'll often do is buy 3 appetizers and no entree at all, and that way I get a little sampling of 3 different things that I really kind of like, and I don't leave hating myself.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons we love talking with you is you actually do research and you get answers.
What?
So many people in
dreaming
this
stuff up?
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
It's amazing how many people do.
When it comes to food, people have very strong belief systems, and a lot of them have no shyness about sharing their beliefs with you.
Right, and they're absolutely convinced they're right. So what experiments are you conducting now that might help us all eat better in the future?
Well, there's a lot of them that we're doing that I think have a lot of relevance. But let's take one that's a great news you could use at home, and it's going to sound boneheadedly simple, but there's a lot of talk in school lunchrooms. So we started this really cool thing called the Smarter Lunchroom Movement, smarterlunchrooms.org, to transform what kids choose in school lunchrooms, not what foods are offered. Because most foods in school lunchrooms are fairly healthy. In fact, 3 out of 4 kids eat better than when they bring foods from home. But it's to get them to take the apple instead of the cookie. What can you do to make them do this and the whole time think it's their own volition that's doing it? Well, one of the silly thing in this particular case that we did was we found that if we take the fruit and take it out of these nasty chafer pans and just put it in nice fruit bowls and put it within 2 feet of a cash register, fruit sales don't go up 5 or 10%, which would be miraculous by most state nutrition standards. Fruit sales go up 105% just by putting this silly thing in a place where you can't miss it. And so we've rolled this out, and we did this study at Homes. And we found that we put all these fruit bowls out or we had people put fruit bowls out in home and monitor how much fruit was taken. And two crazy things happened. First of all, the first week we thought something had gone wrong because nobody reported eating any more fruit, or hardly any. Okay, and we're like, oh wow, why is it working in schools and not at homes? And the second week is like almost nobody took any fruit. But then after about the second week, we found fruit uptake this thing started emptying, and they had to refill it 2 or 3 times a week. But it primarily happened in kitchens where the fruit bowl was placed within, again, 2 feet of a very major walkway. If it was over in the corner on the decorative table, no, people just look at it and wave. But if it was right next to where you hang up your keys or where you drop off your backpack, right, it really got a lot of pickup, but only after the first 2 weeks. And so, I mean, that's a very, very simple, very boneheaded sort of dish thing. But I'm guessing the majority of the listeners here probably don't have a fruit bowl that has 2 or more items of fruit in it right now at their home.
Dr. Wansink, as we wrap up our conversation today, what is the message, especially about food choices, about mood, and about how we make the better choice?
Well, when I wrote the book Mindless Eating, it was interesting. After that, people would come up to me and they'd say, hey, yeah, so the solution to mindless eating is mindful eating. And first of all, you're saying, well, no, you must not have read any of the book, because clearly that's not the solution. Because most of us are just way too crazy busy to, eat half a pea and say, am I full yet? Instead, for most of us, the solution to our mindless overeating ends up being to set up our immediate environments so we can mindlessly make the right choice, so we can mindlessly take a little bit less because we happen to use a smaller plate, or mindlessly take fewer servings because we're serving food off the stove. That's the solution to mindless eating for the majority of us. And, there's tons of tips on mindlesseating.org if you want them. But I also think moving forward that the whole idea of becoming slim by willpower, again, works for some people. But for most of us, just becoming slim by design, making over our homes so they work for us, changing a few habits at restaurants, when we grocery shop, what we do at work, or what happens in our kids' lunchrooms, can tremendously change what we do. And I also believe that in all those institutions, restaurants, grocery stores, workplaces, and where kids go, there are easy win-win things we can ask them to do to help us eat a little bit better, a little bit less, and for them to make a lot more money.
Everybody wins.
Yeah, it's win-win.
Dr. Brian Wansink, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
It's great to be with you again.
You've been listening to Dr. Brian Wansink. He's the John S. Dyson Professor of Applied Economics at Cornell University and director of the renowned Cornell Food and Brand Lab. He's author of Mindless Eating, Why We Eat More Than We Think, and also of the upcoming book, Slim by Design, Mindless Eating Solutions for Everyday Life.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineers the program. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible by Redx Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 Cream with 20% urea for extra skin protection. The website, uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 951. That number again is 800-732-2334, or you can place the order at our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit our site, you can check out prescription drugs, herbal medicines, and home remedies. You can share your own experience and comment on today's show. For more information about Dr. Wansink's approach, you may find our Listen and Read offer of interest.
You could also sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. You need never miss another People's Pharmacy program again, and you can share it with a friend. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks for listening. Please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
If so, please leave a review on iTunes for a chance to get a free copy of our book, The People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies.
This giveaway is open to all U.S. residents at least 18 years old. To enter, leave a review on iTunes and send us a screenshot of your review on our Facebook page. The winner of the free copy of The People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies will be chosen at random on December 10th.